You wake up early, even when you don't need to. The body awakens before the mind. The silence of the house weighs more than the noise. You stare at the ceiling for a few seconds, take a deep breath, and she feels a tiredness that didn't come from sleep. It came from my whole life. If you grew up in the 60s or 70s, this silence knows you well. Perhaps no one has ever asked how you were doing. Perhaps you learned early on to suppress your emotions. Do not disturb. No complaining. Keep moving forward even when injured. You learned to be strong before you were a child. And today, without understanding why, he carries a weight he can't explain. It's not a drama. It's emotional memory. You look back and remember harsh words. Swallow your tears. That's nothing. Stop being so fussy. Simple phrases. But they were recorded. You grew up thinking that feeling was a sign of weakness. Asking for help was shameful. And now as an adult, you feel everything. Alone. Maybe you're the kind of person who solves everything. That endures more than it should. Which he almost never asks for. Who always says, everything's fine, even when it's not there. You have become trustworthy, responsible, strong. But on the inside, he learned to survive in silence. There's a specific kind of loneliness in that. The loneliness of someone who was taught to be tough, not depending on it, not to be demonstrated. You feel it, but you don't show it. You suffer, but you don't talk about it. And sometimes you don't even know how to name what hurts. All you know is that it hurts. And it has hurt for a long time. If you feel you matured too early, this video is for you. If you feel guilty when you rest, feel strange when receiving affection, feels too strong to ask for help, this is not a character flaw. It's history. It's about context. It's psychology. And it starts long before you realize it. There's a name for it, even if you've never heard of it. It's the difficulty of feeling without guilt, to rest without punishing oneself, to ask without feeling ashamed. You feel like you need to earn everything, until rest, even the affection, even love. And when you receive something for free, something inside you is stuck. Many people live like this. They work well, they produce, they help. They carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, but inside they live in constant tension, always alert, as if something bad were about to happen, as if relaxing were dangerous, as if letting your guard down were a mistake. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to say no? How can we automatically take on responsibilities that aren't ours? How guilty do you feel when you rest? Or is it useless when it's not producing? Have you ever wondered why you need to prove your worth all the time? Why do you feel like it's never enough? Why does praise bother more than it comforts? Why does silence weigh so heavily? These questions are not random. They are pointing to a specific wound. If you feel that this is really the case, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This wound is not a lack of self-love. It's an excessive internalized burden. You learned early on that making mistakes has a price. Feeling too much was getting in the way. That crying was a sign of weakness. So you adapted. He established control. It created rigidity. It gained strength. But he paid lightly. The problem isn't being responsible. It's not about being strong. The problem is when force becomes obligation. When resting turns into guilt. When asking becomes embarrassing. When feeling threatened becomes a threat. You don't allow yourself to fall. Failure is not an option. Because back then, failure wasn't an option. It was punishment. That's why so many people feel a strange emptiness, an anxiety without a name, a functional sadness. Life goes on, but something remained stuck in the past, something that has never been heard before. He was never welcomed. It was never validated. And now it manifests as emotional exhaustion. A tiredness that doesn't go away with physical rest. When you grew up in the 60s and 70s, the world didn't ask how you felt. I was asking if you could handle it. And you learned to endure it, to fend for himself. Observe more than speak. Understanding the atmosphere of the house through the tone of voice. Sensing danger in silence. Ripening before its time. This shaped his emotional system. Childhood taught me that love came with conditions. What affection came after the effort? The attention you received was when you weren't causing trouble, so you learned how to be good, not kind-hearted, good behavior, good performance, good for silence. And he carried that into adulthood, trying to be accepted for what he does, not for what he feels. Your body has learned to stay alert, even when everything seems fine. There is an underlying tension, constant readiness, as if something could go wrong at any moment. This is not pessimism. It's emotional memory. It's the body repeating an old pattern, a pattern that once protected you, but today it tires you. You didn't have room for error. Then he gained control. You didn't have space to feel. Then he created rationalization. You didn't have space to be cared for. Then she learned to take care of everyone. And today he finds it difficult to receive the money, to receive help, to receive affection, to receive rest. Because back then, this didn't exist without cost. These behaviors repeat themselves without you realizing it. You attract relationships where you need to be strong, jobs where you need to prove yourself, situations where you carry more than you should. And he calls that responsibility. But at its core, it's ancient survival instinct. It's the child who learned that relaxing was dangerous, that depending on them was risky, what feeling needed to be hidden, and that being needed was the only way to belong. None of this came from nowhere. None of this is weakness. All of this is adaptation. It was the way you found to stay alive, to be accepted, to avoid being rejected, to avoid being punished. But outdated adaptations exact a high price, and the price usually appears quietly, in the form of profound emotional exhaustion. Imagine someone like you. Wake up early. He is punctual, solve problems. He is seen as a strong person, reliable, responsible. No one imagines what happens when the door closes, when the world falls silent, when all that's left is him and his thoughts. This person sits on the edge of the bed at night, the tired body, the connected mind, reviewing conversations, reviewing old mistakes, little things that nobody remembers anymore, but they still weigh on us. She feels like crying, but he doesn't know exactly why, and decides to swallow once more. At work, everyone trusts her. At home, everyone depends on her. In the family, she is the support, the firm point, what cannot fail. She smiles. That's a joke. He says everything is under control, but inside, she feels a constant tightness, a feeling of never being able to truly rest. When someone asks if everything is all right, she automatically replies, "Yes, okay." Not a penny. It's a reflex. Because back then, when they asked, there was no time for a reply. There was anticipation. There was a charge. There was a fear of disappointing. Then she learned that feeling needed to happen quickly, and hiding it had to be efficient. In moments of affection, something freezes up. Praise is unsettling. The hug feels strange. There is a difficulty in receiving payment without justifying it. No return, without proving anything in return. She feels she needs to earn even affection, as if love were a debt, as if care came with an expiration date. And this didn't just appear now. He was born very early. This person is not cold. It's not far. She is deeply sensitive, but he learned how to hide it, because sensitivity at that time was not protected. It was corrected. So she shut herself off in order to survive. And it survived well. But now she lives tired, without understanding why he carries a weight that no one sees. What almost no one realizes is the invisible effort. You don't just live. You control yourself all the time. Control your tone of voice. Control the reaction. Control your crying. Control your anger. Control your sadness. You learned that feeling too much had consequences. So he lives in constant internal vigilance. From the outside, it looks calm. Inside, there's tension. A tension that doesn't scream, but it's tight. A tension that doesn't explode, but it's tiring. You think too much before you speak. They overmeasure before ordering. And he almost never allows himself to be spontaneous. because spontaneity was once dangerous. There is also the silent fear of dependence. To depend on someone, to depend on a connection, to depend on a feeling. You trust them but not completely. Love, but with restraint. It's delivered, but with an emergency exit. Because back then, when he needed it, there wasn't always someone who stayed. And the body doesn't forget that. You became an adult too early. And this is seen as a virtue. But nobody talks about grief. The grief of a child who could not be a child. That couldn't possibly be wrong. She couldn't cry without being corrected. Who could not rest without guilt. That child still exists inside you. But she learned to be quiet. A lot of what you call way. It is, in fact, an old defense. Seriousness. Self-control. The difficulty in relaxing. The need to have everything under control. None of this is random. All of this once protected you. But today, it limits you. And you feel it without being able to explain it. The greatest pain is not what happened. It's something that could never be felt before. That's what was swallowed. It's the one that was left without a name, no space, no welcome. You moved on, but he left parts of himself behind, and they continue to silently demand attention, not with words, but with profound emotional exhaustion. This pattern takes its toll on relationships. You love, but you protect yourself. Get involved, but keep your distance. They are afraid of being a burden to the other person. Fear of bothering others. Fear of needing too much. So you give more than you receive. Listen more than you speak. It provides more than it asks for. And gradually, you start to feel lonely even when you're with someone. Self-esteem also feels affected, not because you think you're incapable, but because it never feels like enough. Something is always missing. I could always have done more. Praise goes in, but it doesn't stay. Criticism enters and becomes its home. You criticize yourself for the details. People are punished for minor mistakes, and he lives with the feeling of being indebted to the world. The decisions become more difficult. You overthink before choosing. He's afraid of making mistakes, fear of disappointing, fear of losing approval. So postpone it. Swallow your urge. Accept less than you deserve. Not because I don't know what I want, but because he learned that wanting too much was dangerous. The future is also affected. You plan. It is being organized. It prevents risks. But he has difficulty dreaming. To imagine lightness. To believe that you can be cared for. There's always a what if it goes wrong in the back of your mind. A feeling that something could collapse at any moment. Even when everything is fine, the body speaks what the mouth did not say. Insomnia, constant tension, pains that have no clear cause, a tiredness that just won't go away. You rest, but you don't relax. It stops, but doesn't turn off. Because the emotional system never learned how to feel safe. He learned to resist. And resisting for too long is exhausting. The most painful part is this. You become too strong to ask, too functional to be noticed, too responsible to be cared for, and the world applauds. But inside, something is screaming for a break, for welcoming, for permission to be human, not perfect, not strong all the time. There is an important moment of awareness, and it starts here. You are not broken. You are hurt. Hurt by having to be strong too soon. Because she learned to fend for herself without being held. Because she survived without emotional space. This didn't become a defect. It's become the norm. And standards can be updated. Nothing you feel is an exaggeration. Nothing is weakness. Nothing is dramatic. It's the body's response to a long history. A story that you had to adapt to. But adaptation is not identity. What saved you in the past? You don't need to be trapped in the present. Recognizing this is already a change, even if it still hurts. Change doesn't happen with pretty phrases. It begins when you stop blaming yourself. When you understand that your personality didn't just appear out of nowhere, that its rigidity has an origin, that your difficulty in asking has a root cause, that your tiredness makes sense. This brings relief. It doesn't solve everything, but it opens up internal space, and space is the beginning of healing. Little by little, you can learn something new, to feel without punishing oneself, resting without having to justify it, ask without feeling ashamed, not all at once, not fast, but consciously, with respect to its history, without internal violence, because you've already experienced too much rigidity. You don't have to stop being strong. You just need to stop being so strong all the time. There's no need to erase the past. You need to stop automatically repeating the pain. You can learn to embrace the child who has been silenced. Listen to the tiredness before it turns into illness, allowing help without feeling guilty. This doesn't weaken you. That humanizes you. True maturity isn't about enduring everything. It's about knowing when to stop, when you feel like it, when to order. You don't need to prove anything anymore. He has already survived what seemed impossible. Now you can learn to live differently, with a stronger presence, more smoothness, more truth with yourself. Perhaps you've never stopped to look at yourself this way. No judgment, no charge, only with truth, understanding that much of who you are today. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was an adaptation. It was about survival. It was the way you found to keep going. And that deserves respect, not blame. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to listen to yourself. Listen to the tiredness that you've normalized, the loneliness you learned to bear in silence, rigidity that became identity. When you understand where you come from, something relaxes you inside. It's not an immediate solution. It's lucidity, and clarity changes trajectories. Perhaps you realize it now, that it wasn't too cold. He was too sensitive in a world that was too harsh, that it wasn't difficult to deal with. He was someone who never had space to feel, that it was not independent by nature. He was someone who learned early that relying on them wasn't safe. This changes the way you see yourself, and it changes the way you treat yourself. The question that remains is not, what's wrong with me? It's another one. What happened to me? When that question changes, the relationship with oneself also changes. You start to slow down before you start demanding more from yourself. Listen before making demands. To embrace oneself before correcting oneself. And that, in itself, is a powerful start. Perhaps no one has ever told you this, but you did the best you could, with what he had. And that's enough. It won't stop growing. But to stop hurting yourself, trying to prove your worth. You don't need to be strong all the time. To deserve love, rest, and care. You already deserve it, even in silence. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. Leave a like. Turn on notifications. This helps this content reach its intended audience, to those who also carry invisible wounds. Sometimes, understanding one's own history, it's the first step towards finally breathing differently.